Critical Focus channel.
Alright, it's time for another rival deck review. This time it's the brand new rival deck, the Realmstone Raiders. As always, an initial big thanks to Games Workshop for sending me this deck ahead of time to review and playtest for all of you. So let's get into it. The Realmstone Raiders is surprisingly, well, not anymore since we've known now for a while, a mastery deck when I think most of us expected the second whole deck to sort of come around to even out the number of decks of all types to 2 each, but alas it is not. Not only is it a mastery deck, but it is one with a plot card as well, which doesn't really matter if you play rivals purely, but if you play Nemesis it will indeed matter, as you are not allowed to mix and match 2 decks that both have a plot card. Only one of your chosen decks may have one. So this disqualifies this deck from mixing with the Countdown to Cataclysm as well as the Edge of the Knife. So any thoughts of synergy with those particular decks is best forgotten straight away. So before visiting the deck itself, it makes the most sense for us to take a good old look at this very plot card. I won't bother with the lore side of this card, so let's just flip the card over and read the mechanics. So, while using this rival deck immediately after the first successful friendly melee attack in an action step, you can raid a number of times equal to the bounty characteristic of the target. Raid. It means reveal the top card of your power deck. That card is raided. If that card is an Emberstone card, you can put that card back on top or on the bottom of your power deck. Emberstone cards have the following additional rules. First up, Emberstone Ploy. You can play this Ploy immediately after it is raided. Emberstone Upgrade. You can equip this upgrade immediately after it is raided if you have the required glory points. If a raided card is not an Emberstone card, put that card on the bottom of your deck. So it works only on successful attacks and only melee attacks specifically, and they have to be done in an action step. So out of sequence attacks made in a power step like improvised attack do not trigger this. Do note also that it says you can raid, so you don't have to raid, but if you choose to raid you have to do it a number of times equal to the bounty. It doesn't say up to or something like that. The sweet thing with this is that even if there's only one card left in your pile and you attack Mollog or some big bounty fighter like that, you could simply just reveal the last card in your power deck, put it back and repeat the process with the same old card until you're done. This is a super interesting mechanic. Well, not that specific example, but at large. But the last part there with putting non-Emberstone cards bottom makes deck building with this a very tricky endeavor indeed. That being said though, in the game we played where I used this one, I had outdrawn myself at the start of round 3, so even the cards you potentially put bottom, unless you build very heavily into another deck, may still get drawn faster than normally. Let's move on to the search objectives next. First up we have a sure bet. This one is scored after raiding an Emberstone card after rolling 3 dice in the attack roll preceding the raiding. Yeah, I mean it sort of depends on your fighters. Not all warbands have a ton of accurate 3 dice swinging melee fighters, but other than that it's not wildly difficult, right? You just need to raid a single card from the Emberstone bunch. Doesn't need to be one with a Ploy or upgrade. Search just a card from the deck. Critical risk next is in the same sort of vein. Raid an Emberstone card after rolling a crit in the attack roll. Yeah, that's pretty trivial. Looted Realmstone next needs us to raid 2 cards from the same attack. Yeah, this one is trickier if we are up against hordes, say Sarbag, which is fairly common nowadays, Grimwatch, Sepulchral Guard, or what have you. We are not raiding more than 1 card ever unless we draw a domain card that I'll get to later. But that's a little light on the synergy, honestly, to be able to bet on this card being scored. So this is a wishy-washy card in my opinion. Obviously most opponents have 1 or more fighters with 2 bounty, but it's not always the case. Next up is Pillage. This one is scored after raiding 2 or more different Emberstone cards after a melee attack if the target was in neutral or enemy territory. The last part isn't that tall of an order, and the reason it clarifies that it has to be after a melee attack is that there are a couple of cards that temporarily lets us raid in other fashions, but they won't score you this card then. Same sort of deal here as the previous one. It's gonna be a far taller order versus hordes, but it's certainly not a horrible search in most scenarios. Raged Rock Strike is a lot more solid though, with simply resolving the Emberstone Ploy or Emberstone upgrade ability. So it's scored after you reveal a card that has one of these search abilities and you use that search ability. There's ploys that stagger an enemy fighter or pushes one of your fighters, for example, so not very hard prerequisites to achieve. This is rather trivial. Lastly, Reckless Gambit is scored after raiding Emberstone cards for the second or subsequent time this round, and each Emberstone card raided was a different card. So just make sure if you have this in your hand and want to score it, you block it by putting a card atop and thus revealing the same card at a later point. But other than that, it is rather easy really. So I think at least 4 out of 6 cards here could easily be scored against most opponents. In earnest, all of them, but 2 of them requires additional tech that might or might not coincide with them being drawn. Still, having 4 rather solid searches is a pretty good spot for a rival deck to be in. My one beef with this so far is this whole ordeal is riding on successful melee attacks specifically, which really forces a very aggressive playstyle. So even if the whole draw mechanic certainly taps into mastery, what you are required to do to get there is very aggressive, and I'm not necessarily saying that's a purely bad thing. I am the first one to hate on super defensive, I'll just back into a corner and score passive glory while I ping you to death kind of playstyles, but it is definitely rather aggressive. Well, let's move into the end phases. Certain aggression first up is 2 glory, and it needs you to have raided 2 times in a round, and there needs to be no enemy in friendly territory. So basically denial with a rather trivial twist. I usually don't fancy the 1 glory denial currently in rotation, but this one is more to my liking. Emberstone Stash next is 1 glory for raiding 4 times in a round. Yeah, it's gonna be very matchup dependent. Versus a horde warband such as the very popular Sarbug Skits, this needs you to basically land 4 out of 4 attacks, and that's quite a tall order for 1 glory. Yes, there's domain cards to help us out, but I'm not totally sold on this in Nemesis. It's way too untrivial for 1 glory. Hoarder's Hovel is 2 glory for holding a treasure token with a value that is equal to the bounty of the fighter holding it. This is pretty decent on, say, 3 to 5 man warbands that have some good spread of the bounty values on their fighters. And 2 glory is rather tempting and fairly easy for the effort here. Invade is 1 glory for having raided while the defender was holding a treasure token. Yeah, I'm not the greatest of fan of this for 1 glory. Finding a fighter on a treasure token to attack isn't maybe the most tall order, but that has to land, and in build format you also need to find an Emberstone card specifically after doing so. I think there's more trivial stuff to complement within Nemesis. Realmstone Raid is 2 glory for having raided 3 or more times after different friendly fighters' attacks. This is slightly confusing at first glance. It says 3 or more raided cards, but it doesn't say 3 or more different friendly fighters, just different friendly fighters. So if you can pull 3 or more raids out of simply attacking with 2 different friendly fighters, it is good to go. Same sort of deal here, a tall order versus hordes, but not as much so as the Emberstone Stash one, and given this is 2 glory, I certainly value this way above that one. Last card here is Roused Violence for 2 glory, and it requires there to be an equal amount or a less amount of treasure tokens than the amount of times you raided Emberstone cards specifically. So yeah, raids requires successful attacks and ideally on fighters with 2 bounty or more. So same sort of story here. It's gonna depend on your opposition. But with some tech to help us out, I think this 2 glory card might be worth taking. You can help out with flipping as well, and it mixes well with pillage and plunder if you want to go that route. So overall, I am fairly optimistic of what I'm seeing here. A healthy amount of fairly scoreable 2 glory objectives, which is very important for any deck to really be worth considering. So let's move on to the ploys. First up is an Emberstone ploy called A Step Ahead, which you can then play immediately after raiding or whenever, if it's already in your hand. With it, you can pick a friendly fighter in neutral or enemy territory and push that fighter 1 hex. That push must end closer to an enemy fighter. The wording here is very important. At first glance, it might look like you wouldn't be able to push if you were already adjacent to an enemy fighter, but it actually says that push must end closer to an enemy fighter, not necessarily the closest one. So as long as you end up closer to an enemy fighter than you were previously, you are good. And that makes also the card a lot more versatile and honestly quite good, since it's usable both sort of defensively and offensively to quite a good effect. Ambush next is a search ploy, but not an Emberstone ploy at that. But rather it reacts to you making a ranged attack, and it means you can raid after a ranged attack while you normally couldn't. I don't think range heavy warbands is a great fit for this deck, and I don't think a single ploy will alleviate that fact, so I don't really think this is a very necessary card. Next one is Angered Focus, which again has the Emberstone ploy mechanic. With this one you can pick a friendly fighter holding a treasure token in friendly territory without a move, charge or stagger token, and it lets you raid a number of cards equal to the fighter's bounty characteristic. Cards raided in this way do not count as having been raided as a result of a successful attack, which is important of course, but also quite obvious, but I guess it's good to clarify. Yeah, it does help quite a few end phases out, and search or two as well. Getting onto treasure tokens without move or charge tokens requires tech though, or just a later round draw at least, so there is that. Too bad it's friendly territory specifically, as I think the caveat with simply being on a treasure token without a charge or move is sort of enough of a prerequisite. Still, helping out your raiding might be pivotal, so I'm sort of on the fence on this one. Fortune Faded is a card that has great synergy with Rack and Ruin, with you picking a friendly fighter adjacent to an enemy fighter that is not vulnerable and then pinging both fighters. Also use a card for Gore Chosen or Dread Pageants, and it helps you score bloody and bruised and some other stuff. Hidden Knowledge next is an Emberstone ploy, and it allows you to pick an enemy fighter adjacent to a friendly fighter and give that fighter a move token. Especially good if you are up against Reckless Fury to shut down Unrelenting Massacre, or just simply shut off charges, or the charged out state of an elite warband or something like that. Having to be adjacent to do it is the caveat here, I guess. Intoxicated with Rage next is also an Emberstone ploy, and it allows you to guard a fighter without a move or charge token. Guard tokens are always pretty usey now in 2nd edition. Too bad it only works without tokens, as charging in and subsequently guarding a fighter over yonder is just so much easier, but I'm sure you'll find a use for this anyway. Doing stuff that normally eats up an action step for free is always good in my book. Manipulated Fate is a standard search ploy which is used for an incoming attack. Save rolls made for that attack counts as having more crits in the attack rolls for the purpose of the standfast ability. So it doesn't say successful save rolls or anything along those lines, it simply states that you are counted as having more crits than the attacker. So it will then automatically reduce damage and ignore drive back and the overrun, which is pretty sweet. Surprise damage spikes or surprise damage mitigations are very solid. Misstep is an Emberstone ploy which allows you to simply stagger an enemy fighter. Not very exciting, but it's okay. Probably wouldn't bother in build formats. Obviously making sure you have a decent amount of Emberstone ploys to score Rage Rock consistently is something to consider, of course. Raider's Premonition is an Emberstone ploy as well, which lets you put an objective card in your hand bottom and then draw one objective card. Really liking this one. Being able to manipulate your objective deck is really good to perfect the sequencing, especially paired with the Knights of the Crown Warband as own mechanic there. This is even more awesome. Lastly, we have Raider's Rapture for a domain effect of increasing the amount of cards you reveal when you raid by 1, which helps quite a few cards out. The wording here is sort of wishy-washy. Revealing 1 additional cards when you raid doesn't, as written, I'm not sure actually, equate to raiding 2 times. It still only counts as 1 raid as far as I'm concerned, as written. This really needs clarifying though. But say you are attacking a 2 bounty fighter, it normally allows you to raid 2 times, and each raid is an individual raid, so that means you get to raid 4 times. Rather than 3 actually. I do hope the intended meaning here is that the extra card reveal does also count as having been raided. Otherwise it would make this deck even more impossible to sort of get going with versus certain warbands. But yeah, certainly needs to be clarified there, I think. I did check with the guys from Agents of Sigmar on a fair few cards. We usually have some discussion back and forth before stuff drops to sort of come to a consensus, and their idea was that they do count as having been raided, but yeah, it remains to be seen, I guess. So the overall theme here is the Emberstone ploys, which makes having an opportunity to play them more versatile for sort of slightly less powerful effects. And when we look at the upgrades in just a minute, we'll also notice there is some, or quite some, recycling involved, which means you'll get more than one use out of a fair few cards as well. Let us now look at the upgrades. First up is a rather interesting one called Armor Piercer for 2 glory, which is an Emberstone upgrade, so you can equip it after raiding it if your finances are sound enough to support the lifestyle. It has an additional search ability, however, called Breached. Again, I really don't understand why you give an upgraded name and then a search ability on top of that with a different name. Why? Anyway, it triggers if you draw an attack you make if your damage characteristic is greater than the save characteristic. And then you get to inflict 1 damage even if it's just a draw. And after you have inflicted that 1 damage, you discard the card. So it's essentially a 2 glory cost highly situational ping. That's not me writing it off. I definitely see the merits of the card. I'm just telling you as it is. But given how crits work nowadays, drawn attacks are a lot more common, and it's not rare to have a higher damage output than the amount of save dice in the defense either. Say the defender is rolling 2 dodge or 2 shields, you need then a baseline 3 damage attack or a 2 damage attack with Grievers or something like that to trigger this effect. If they are rolling 1 dice, you need 2 damage. Or more. So not really a stretch in a lot of scenarios. I find it a bit hard to gauge how good this really is though at first glance, but I will definitely try it out, and for end phases or searches that specifically just need you to have an X amount of damaged fighters or whatever, this can surely help out a bit. Next upgrade to look at is another Emberstone upgrade called Brightstone Vigor, which also has another search ability called Soothed by Slaughter, which allows you to heal if you succeed with an attack while fulfilling the conditions on the previous upgrade I talked about. And then you discard a card. This one is also 2 glory. I don't really care that much for this one, honestly. Maybe for an elite warband where every fighter is sort of really crucial to keep around. Or maybe where you have one very central fighter like Mollog or Black Powder or something, and I guess it could be worth it. Especially since they are very heavy hitters, they have an easy time to sort of trigger the effect. Call to Power next is also an Emberstone upgrade for 1 glory that has the Heed the Call search ability that is usable immediately after a successful attack and lets you draw 1 power card and then discard this card. So basically a 1-for-1 type card. Card draw is pretty strong though, and if you can double down on it from other sources like from your own warband mechanics or whatever, all the better I guess. Emberstone Edge is a weapon upgrade again for 2 glory. Quite a few of them here. It's also an Emberstone upgrade by the way. It's not super impressive as an attack with 1 range 2 hammers 1 damage, but it has +1 dice if you raided this turn. So not terribly hard to get there. Still, a 2 glory upgrade for a weapon that only hits for 1 damage is certainly subpar. I'll take Desperate Rage, please and thank you very much. Forgotten Fortune is yet another Emberstone upgrade. This one for 1 glory. It has the search ability Lingering Power. With it, you can react to a successful attack made by this fighter, and with it you can return a ploy from your power discard pile to your hand, and then discard this card. To be able to use, say, Raider's Raptures for 2 rounds instead of just 1 is pretty darn sweet. Quite a good card. Now we get to a plethora of old reprints, so I won't bother with these beyond just saying they are all really solid. We have great speed, great fortitude, great strength, and keen eye as well. 3 of these are 2 glory though, so there's quite a heavy tax on this upgrade allotment. Our last card here is Reforged Aid, a 1 glory Emberstone upgrade with the Salvaged Arms search ability, which allows you to do the exactly same thing as the Forgotten Fortunes, but this time instead you can recycle an upgrade and discard this card. So you could potentially get double mileage out of, say, your heal upgrade or whatever. Quite interesting. So that is it, right? A lot of recycle and draw shenanigans. I find it quite hard to gauge the power of this deck, and I think the real test will be how well it works while mixing it with other decks, especially since we are already a bit limited given the fact that we have a plot card here as well. Because on its own the mechanics should flow really well, but how much will its mechanics become hampered when you mix in other stuff? The fact that solid staples like a great fort, great strength, keen eye, etc. is there lessens the need to really heavy complement the upgrades, but this deck relies heavily upon landing attacks, and since so many of the upgrades trigger its effect on them, and especially also since so many of the objectives counts on successful attacks, since that's how the raiding happens. And there's very little in terms of accuracy built in the Ploy allotment here. There's basically only a single stagger to help us out, and I don't really think it's gonna cut it unless all of your fighters are already super accurate. Well, that is it for the review and walkthrough really of what is only, of course, my first impressions of the Realmstone Raiders rival deck. Most certainly a very unique deck, and I really like that this design space is being explored more. So kudos to the designers there. Let's see if it stands the test of time though. Make sure to make your thoughts known down below in the comments. Do like the video if you liked it, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, bye. Lastly, a big shout out to all my members that help support my content and makes it so much easier for me to produce multiple videos on a weekly basis. Members do get access to the member Discord, get to influence the content, get early access to a ton of videos, as well as get featured in the monthly painting showcase if they want. Member or not, I dearly appreciate the like, the comment and the subscription.